The morning light was pale and watery as it streamed through the tall windows of a private room in Buckingham Palace. Princess Anne stood with her back straight, a posture that had been drilled into her since childhood and had never once deserted her. She held a cup of tea, but it was growing cold in her hands. On the table beside her, a newspaper carried the latest headline about the turmoil engulfing the House of Windsor. Her brother, King Charles, was facing a perfect storm, the relentless fallout from the Epstein scandal surrounding their brother Andrew, his own ongoing battle with cancer, and the delicate, constant pressure of redefining a modern monarchy. Yet, it was not the headlines that troubled Anne this morning. It was the silence, specifically the silence surrounding the Prince and Princess of Wales. And she had watched from a distance as Catherine had endured her own terrifying health scare, a battle with cancer that had stripped the usually radiant princess of her hair and her privacy, forcing her into a grueling cycle of preventative chemotherapy. Anne had seen the photographs, the pale face, the strained smile. She had also seen the comments online, the cruel speculation, the impatience from some corners for her to get back to work. It was this lack of public vocal support from the very institution they were meant to be the future of that had lit a fire in Anne's usually stoic heart. For decades, Anne had been the embodiment of the old royal motto, "Never complain, never explain." She had inherited her mother's sense of duty, a belief that one simply got on with the job, no matter the personal cost. She had endured kidnappers, a press intrusion, and the constant scrutiny of a life lived in the goldfish bowl. She had watched her mother, the Queen, navigate crises with a serene, silent dignity. But this felt different. Catherine was not just a princess. She was a young mother, a wife, a woman fighting for her health, and her husband, William, was trying to hold his family together while also stepping into an ever larger role as his father's health fluctuated. Anne placed the cold cup down with a decisive clink. The never complain, never explain rule had its place, but so did family. She had seen the toll that isolation had taken on her own children, and she was determined that the same fate would not befall William and Catherine without a fight. She requested a private audience with her brother, the king. It was time to speak out, not to the press, but to the one person whose opinion mattered most within the family. It was time to ensure that the future of the monarchy felt supported by its present. The meeting was not held in a formal throne room, but in the king's private study, a room filled with the clutter of a lifetime, books, family photographs, and the faint scent of sandalwood. Charles, looking tired but resolute, greeted his sister with a weary smile. They had always had a complicated, deeply affectionate relationship, two people born into roles they did not choose but were duty-bound to fulfill. After exchanging pleasantries about his health, Anne did not waste time. She spoke with the directness that was her trademark. She told him that while the institution was grappling with Andrew's shadow and the need for a slimmed-down monarchy, they were in danger of forgetting the beating heart of their future. "William and Catherine are not just assets of the crown, Charles," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "They are your son and daughter-in-law. They have been through the ringer, and they are out there day after day trying to connect with people, to be modern, to be relevant, all while dealing with the most profound personal fears about Catherine's health." She pointed out that the palace's official statements, while correct, were cold. They lacked the warmth of familial backing. She reminded him of their mother's greatest strength, her ability to make people feel seen and valued, not just as subjects, but as human beings. "We need to show the same to William and Catherine," Anne insisted. "Publicly, firmly, not just as a king to his heir, but as a family." Charles listened, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He knew she was right. The weight of the crown had made him cautious, but his sister's words cut through the political calculations and reminded him of his fundamental duty as a father. By the time Anne left, a new understanding had been forged. The king would make it clear his support for the Prince and Princess of Wales was absolute. The first public sign of this renewed familial front came on a rain-swept Tuesday afternoon. The King and Queen Camilla were undertaking a joint engagement with the Prince and Princess of Wales. It was a carefully orchestrated piece of theater, but the sentiment behind it was genuine. As the four of them walked together, the cameras captured a moment that no press release could manufacture. Now the king leaned in to speak privately with Catherine, his hand lightly touching her elbow, his expression one of unmistakable paternal concern. Catherine, in turn, smiled, a real warm smile that reached her eyes, and nodded at something he said. Later that day, a senior palace aide, in a break with tradition, briefed the press on the private and close-knit nature of the family's support for the Waleses. The briefing spoke of regular video calls between the king and his grandchildren, and the immense pride the whole family felt in Catherine's courage. It was a deliberate shift in tone, a move away from the stiff upper lip towards a more emotionally intelligent form of monarchy. The headlines the next day reflected the change. King's tender moment with Kate, they read. Our family stands firm behind Waleses. It was exactly the message Anne had hoped to send. But Anne was not one for sentimentality alone. Her support for William and Catherine was also deeply practical. She knew that genuine support meant more than just kind words. It meant sharing the burden. For years, Anne had been the undisputed workhorse of the family, undertaking hundreds of engagements a year while younger royals came and went. Now, with Charles ill and Catherine recuperating, the pressure on William was immense. He was expected to be a present father, a supportive husband, and the de facto leader of the monarchy all at once. Anne saw the strain in his eyes during family gatherings and decided to act. She quietly approached the king's private secretary with an offer. She would take on more of the bread-and-butter duties that William was finding it difficult to schedule. Investiture ceremonies, regimental visits, charity patronages, the kind of work that didn't make global headlines but was the bedrock of the royal existence. I live here, she reportedly told an aide, referring to her residence near Gatcombe Park. I have the time. Let William be with his family. This was not about power or influence. It was about clearing the path for her nephew. This practical support extended beyond the official diary. Anne made a point of visiting Adelaide Cottage, the Wales family home on the Windsor estate, for quiet, unpublicized teas. She would arrive without fanfare, often driving herself, and spend time with her great-nieces and nephew, George, Charlotte, and Louis. To them, she was just Aunt Anne, a no-nonsense presence who taught them about horses and told them stories about their great-grandmother, the Queen. For William and Catherine, these visits were a lifeline. Here was someone who understood the weight of their position without needing it explained. Someone who offered help without judgment and advice without condescension. Catherine, in particular, found an unexpected ally in her aunt-in-law. They were, on the surface, very different. Catherine was polished, modern, and emotionally expressive, while Anne was blunt, traditional, and guarded. But beneath the surface, they shared a core of steel. Anne recognized in Catherine the same quiet determination that had carried her through her own difficult years in the public eye. She offered Catherine a unique form of solidarity, the assurance that she could define her own role, on her own terms. You don't have to be a replica of anyone who came before you, Anne told her during one of their private chats. You just have to be yourself. That is what the public ultimately responds to. It was the kind of wisdom that could only come from someone who had spent 60 years in the spotlight and emerged with her integrity intact. As the weeks passed, the strategy of firm public support began to bear fruit. The narrative around the monarchy started to shift. Where once there had been endless speculation about rift and turmoil, the press began to focus on the images of unity. There was the Commonwealth Day service where the family walked in together, a solid, impenetrable block. Anne was seen escorting Catherine to her seat, a small but significant gesture of protection. The body language experts on television noted the coalition between the Princess Royal and the Princess of Wales, a powerful signal of female solidarity within the traditionally patriarchal institution. This visible support gave William and Catherine the space they needed to breathe. Catherine, feeling the weight of her family's backing, was able to make a carefully managed return to public life. Her first engagement was a visit to a hospice, a cause close to her heart. The photographs of her speaking gently with patients and staff were met with an outpouring of public affection. The cruel comments were drowned out by a wave of support. People saw not just a princess, but a survivor. And they saw the royal family, not as a cold and distant institution, but as a group of people rallying around one of their own. The king's own public statements became warmer, more personal. In a speech at a palace reception for health workers, he made an unscheduled, off-the-cuff remark. "As some of you may know," he said, looking towards where William and Catherine were standing, "my wonderful daughter-in-law has had her own recent dealings with the remarkable professionals in our NHS. We are all so proud of her." The room erupted in applause, and Catherine's eyes glistened with tears. It was a masterclass in the power of public affirmation, a lesson learned directly from Anne's intervention weeks earlier. The message was clear. The king was not just the head of state, he was the head of a family, and he would fight for every member of it. Behind the scenes, the dynamic within the family was changing. The focus on Andrew's scandal, while still present, was no longer the only story. The media, sensing a more positive narrative, began to run features on the new-look royal family, one that was smaller, more focused, and apparently more united. Anne's role in this transformation was not something she sought credit for, but it was quietly acknowledged by those in the know. She was the bridge between the old world and the new, the guardian of her mother's legacy, who was also wise enough to know when that legacy needed to evolve. She had not changed her own stoic nature, but she had used her influence to create an environment where William and Catherine did not have to be stoic alone. She had given them permission to be human, and in doing so had strengthened the monarchy immeasurably. The proof of this new equilibrium came during the summer, at the annual Braemar gathering, one of the Queen's favorite events. The whole family was in attendance. The king looked relaxed and healthy, laughing with spectators. But it was the image of William and Catherine that captured the world's attention. They were sitting with their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, who were giggling at the Highland Games. Catherine, her hair grown back and her color returned, was leaning over to whisper something to a beaming Princess Anne. It was a picture of pure, unguarded family joy. The newspapers ran the photo side by side with one from decades earlier, of the Queen with a young Anne and Charles. The caption read, "The torch is passed." In that moment, the strategy that Anne had set in motion months earlier reached its full fruition. And it was no longer about managing a crisis. It was about building a future. The public saw a family that was functional, loving, and resilient. They saw a king who was strong but tender, an heir who was dedicated but present, and a princess who was graceful but tough. And they saw, standing firmly in the background, the figure of Princess Anne, the architect of this unity, the one who had spoken out when silence was the easier option. She had not sought the limelight, but her presence was felt in every glance and every gesture of support that passed between the family members. Later that evening, as the family gathered for a private dinner at Balmoral, the conversation turned to the day's events. William raised a glass to his aunt. "To Aunt Anne," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Catherine echoed the sentiment, her eyes meeting Anne's across the table. Anne, ever uncomfortable with direct praise, simply waved a hand dismissively. "Rubbish," she muttered, but a rare, genuine smile played on her lips. In that simple exchange was the essence of their relationship. Deep, unspoken respect, fortified by action rather than words. The story of that year would be written in history books as a time of great challenge for the House of Windsor. A king's illness, a princess's cancer battle, a brother's disgrace. But it would also be remembered as a time of remarkable resilience, a time when the family learned to lean on each other in new and profound ways. And at the heart of that resilience was a woman who had spent her entire life preparing for a role she never expected to play. Princess Anne had not just spoken out, that she had redefined what it meant to be royal. She had proven that strength was not about being unfeeling, but about being unshakable in your support for those you love. Her actions sent a powerful message that resonated far beyond the gilded walls of the palace. In a world increasingly cynical about institutions, the sight of a family genuinely uniting in the face of adversity was a potent antidote. People saw in Princess Anne the qualities they most admired: loyalty, pragmatism, and an unwavering sense of duty, not to an abstract crown, but to the people who wore it. She had become, in her own unassuming way, the monarchy's secret weapon, the quiet guarantor of its future. The turmoil that had threatened to engulf them all had not disappeared, but it had been met with a force it could not overcome. The fierce, an unbreakable love of a family. As the year drew to a close, the family gathered once more, this time for the Christmas Day church service at Sandringham. The walk from the house to the church was a time-honored tradition, a chance for the public to see their royals up close. The crowd was large and cheerful, waving flags and calling out greetings. As the family emerged, the camera lenses zoomed in. There was King Charles, walking with Queen Camilla, both smiling broadly. Behind them came William and Catherine, hand in hand with their children. And bringing up the rear, walking with her husband, Sir Tim Lawrence, was Princess Anne. She was not at the front, and that was exactly where she wanted to be. But as she passed a group of well-wishers, a young girl held up a handmade sign. It said simply, "Thank you, Princess Anne." For a split second, Anne's composure flickered. She glanced at the sign, then at the girl, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. It was a moment that lasted barely a second, but it captured everything. The public, in their intuitive way, understood the role she had played. They understood that the stability and warmth they were witnessing on that crisp Christmas morning was, in no small part, down to the woman at the back, the one who never sought the spotlight but was always there, solid as an oak, ensuring that the future of the family and the monarchy was safe and sound. She had spoken out, she had stood firm, and in doing so, she had helped guide her family through the storm and into a calmer, brighter dawn.